Yeah, well, thank you so much, Josh, for that. I know Amy, I'll speak for Amy as well, that we are equally excited to be here and partnering with this opportunity. I think it's great opportunities like this that allow us to be able to do the work that we do out in the field. So thank you, first of all, for what you all do at ASTO, but thank you for everyone who's joining today and the work that you will do to then take these messages out into your states and in your communities. Next slide. I always like to start with a slide about the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. I don't take it for granted that everyone always knows who our organization is and what we are about. But our vision is very simple. It's a future of the death and disease caused by tobacco. So we work with partners, just like you all across the country, to promote proven policies that are the most effective in reducing tobacco use. On the left side, you will see the different type of tobacco control policies that we consider as our core issues. Those have existed for several years, for decades actually, and so they're CDC recommended policy initiatives, and so those continue to be our core initiatives. And then on the right-hand side, you will see several other issues that we all tend to work on and hear about that we consider sort of the supplemental issues that help also in terms of the building blocks when we work in tobacco control. Today, we're going to focus right there on ending the sort of the category around ending the sale of flavored tobacco products. It is, or restrictions on the sale of tobacco products. So we won't present on the overall issue itself, but we will focus specifically on menthol messaging and how it relates to sort of the overall comprehensive policy initiative. Next slide. We wanted to make sure to put some objectives here. So we hope that everyone will be able, as you go on into your breakout session, and that we are able to ensure that you're equipped with being able to explore communication messages for policies that, again, restrict or eliminate the sale of flavored tobacco products. We want to make sure that you're able to identify and describe essential elements for several of the educational materials that you all will be discussing and producing within your states and localities. And we also want to make sure that you understand why there's a strong need to educate, particularly around menthol. We have menthol cigarettes here, but in general, why menthol is such an important element when we are doing messaging around flavored tobacco product policies. Next slide. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Barkley, who will focus on a couple of different methods that helped us look at how we sort of develop and narrowed the type of messages that resonate with the public and or decision makers. So Amy, take it on.
Thanks so much, Claudia, and hi, everyone. I want to preface this part of the presentation by saying I am in the advocacy department, not the research department at TFK, and they are really the experts on all of the only kind of primary research we do, which is, public opinion research. So I'm not a big expert on that. However, I'm very aware of these results that we got, and so hopefully this will be useful to you all as you work on this issue out in the field. So next slide, Mata. I want to kind of detail some of the things that we learned from focus groups that we conducted back in April and May of this year. I will tell you, I listened in on some of these focus groups and they were fascinating. So you may be like us, somewhat surprised about what you hear, some not surprising, some very surprising. So next slide, Mata, and we'll get into some of the key things that we found from these folks that we spoke to. And I should mention also that this was a pretty small sample. So it wasn't, of people, obviously. So it wasn't, sort of a comprehensive measure. It was really more to help us identify, get some insights and direction about how we should be talking about eliminating menthol cigarettes to the public. So like I said, I found it useful. So anyway, you can see here some of the exact quotes from some of the participants. And I should mention that a lot of these folks were in rural communities. That was one area where we felt we didn't really understand how they understood this issue. So let me dig into this and highlight a couple of these quotes, but you can read them for yourself as well. What we learned is that people knew some about menthol cigarettes, and I was actually quite surprised at how much they knew about tobacco control in general. It was interesting. They knew about how raising the price was important. Going back to Claudia's slide about the big three policies that we all work on, they understood about smoke-free laws and the impact on public health for that. And they did understand some things about menthol. They understand that the sensation that people get of cooling and numbing the throat. They did understand that. And again, we had some smokers and some non-smokers, and you'll see one here from what I understand, you're able to take a deeper drag on a mentholated cigarette or a longer drag as compared to regular cigarettes, because it sort of gives you that numbness. So it's longer before you become irritated. So an interesting way to put it, but you'll see how we distilled that down to a message that you all are very familiar with. This one I thought was really interesting. I'm assuming that it might not taste as what I perceive to be nasty, because that menthol flavor would disguise some of the raspiness or harshness of tobacco. And that's certainly very true. And something that, that's something that we captured in our messaging, which you'll see in just a minute. Okay, next slide, Mata. Okay, are we on the, sorry, I'm switching screens here, folks. Okay, perfect. The one thing that we've had a lot of trouble with that was sort of intuitive to us is that people did not understand how menthol cigarettes were different. And in fact, some of the people commented, well, why are we talking about menthol cigarettes? We should just ban all cigarettes. They really didn't understand what was special, if you will, about menthol. So again, big learning lesson for us that we do need to kind of explain what's different about menthol cigarettes. So you can see some of these quotes here, a cigarette's a cigarette, that kind of thing. And I've seen people addicted to regular cigarettes, just like I was with menthols. And so I think, again, the big lesson here was that we do need a lot of public education about what is different about menthol cigarettes. Next slide, Mata. Okay. Okay, and then one thing that we wanted to test, and I just want to make sure you're on the same slide that I am. Okay, great. Like I said, what we learned from this was that we do need to continually educate people about the fact that menthol is more addictive and harder to quit. As you heard, they picked up on some of that as we were asking the questions. You could tell that there was some knowledge there. I'm sorry, y'all. I really am here. Okay. So again, some of the useful quotes that I think are very interesting and give us some insight into what the general public, as opposed to those of us who are immersed in this issue, think. So once you sort of explain this, they did sort of get it. So again, it shows how it's important to just right up front talk about how menthol cigarettes are different from regular cigarettes. And you'll see some of these quotes. And this is like where the revelation is coming in as we're doing some education within the focus groups. I wasn't aware previously of the whole, I've heard about the numbing effect, but the whole deeper drag thing, that does make me think that there's a little bit more dangerous aspect to menthol cigarettes. So they did get that once you told them, but that wasn't necessarily something that they already knew. Okay, so what we took away from all this is that you saw some of the quotes, and I'm sorry I didn't read them all, but for the sake of time, we hope you'll be able to look back on the slides and read some of these quotes, because again, very, very interesting. But the key takeaways for us were that the best message is maintain to focus on kids, on the cost, and on tobacco companies' continued efforts to addict people. So hopefully that gives you just a sort of a general idea of what we found in these focus groups. But next slide, Mata, we'll talk about another bit of data that we got even earlier. Next slide, Mata, was we did a national survey back in the in late 2020, fall of 2020, when we were first starting our very serious effort into eliminating all flavored tobacco products, including menthol cigarettes. And what this national survey, which was unlike the focus groups, which are more qualitative, this was obviously quantitative. And so the findings were that health impacts and the black market were central to voters thinking about prohibiting flavors. So as you all probably know, one of the big arguments of the tobacco industry is that this will create a black market if you try to eliminate menthol cigarettes. And so that was definitely resonating with people. And then the health impacts, again, people did understand the health impacts in general about cigarettes, but not necessarily about menthol. We also found that the broader message, focusing on a much broader message about targeting kids, generated more support overall. But focusing on Black Americans does, is more powerful with certain groups, and particularly with younger African Americans. The arguments highlighting the impact of menthol on the Black community, along with just the overall impacts and COVID, because obviously, this was 2020 in the midst of COVID, those points did resonate with people. And so, again, in looking at the opposition message and their focus on over policing in the Black community, the Black market, and so forth, really what the strongest opposition's messages were about the Black market dangers, about government overreach, and helping the addictive. And the messaging was supported. So anyway, but back to some of the particulars about the poll. As you're looking at the key findings there, it was conducted by the Mellman Group, one of our pollsters, in the fall of 2020. And I should have mentioned in the beginning that it was among Black Americans and also with 18 to 24-year-olds. And again, something that's not on our slide, but that's important to point out, is that focusing on community impact was very important. So focusing on the impact on Black Americans did resonate with, the participants overall. And in addition, because we won't go through all the questions, and certainly we can make this available to you all, at least a summary of this. Some of the polling we asked about other issues, not just menthol, for instance, about e-cigarettes, and talking about tobacco and vaping companies and what they're doing, using flavors to target new customers, particularly kids. That was an effective message. And then again, back to menthol here, we talk about how for decades, tobacco companies have targeted Black communities and Black youth with marketing for menthol cigarettes. The whole issue of how marketing and advertising is heavier in Black communities and Black publications like magazines. And that prices are lower in Black communities. So, letting people know that the Black people didn't just magically decide to prefer menthol. It was as a result of all this targeting, and it has worked, because now we know that 85% of Black smokers use menthol. So that fact in and of itself was very compelling. And another really key message that we derived from this was that it was very effective to talk about how tobacco companies are profiting enormously while Black people get cancer and die, largely because of tobacco use. And specifically, we talk about the 45 100,000 Black lives that are lost to tobacco every year. That became a really standard, important message that you'll see in a couple minutes as we show you the slides that we developed as a result of this research. So let's move on to that, Mata, the menthol ads themselves. So the next slide. So coming up here are what resulted from all these learnings that we got from the focus group and the polling. So next slide there. So again, based on what we heard from these folks in the focus groups and in the polling, we tried to develop a creative platform that positioned menthol as big tobacco's most addictive flavor. Again, focusing on why menthol cigarettes are different. And what we did was we developed print, radio, and digital ads. And so we're going to show you some of those. And just keep in mind that we did have a specific set of goals, again, as a result of this message research, that we were going to hit harder on the tobacco industry and their predatory marketing. We were going to continue to educate about why menthol is different and get support for eliminating menthol cigarettes and answer the questions that are out there that I'm sure you have heard. Why do Black people smoke menthol more? Why is it more addictive? And why now? Why are we taking action to eliminate menthol cigarettes now? So next slide, Mata. So here's what came of it. And hopefully you have seen some of these because we've run a number of campaigns based on this digital in a number of markets. And you'll see in a minute, we've also done radio advertising. So the other thing is that you'll notice the color scheme was really important. We used sort of the black and green to emphasize the whole menthol thing, as opposed to just talking about tobacco use in general. And this really worked well. We used this messaging not just for digital advertising and some print advertising, but we and our partners had a presence at the Congressional Black Caucus's legislative conference the past couple of years. And we used this at the conference to have hopefully a direct impact on those attending the conference, including members of Congress. So that's what these are. Next slide, Mata. And then we did a radio buy actually this past summer that was pretty significant radio ad in many major markets. And our goal was to strengthen support for FDA's efforts, the FDA rules that you've all were well aware of. So we obviously wanted to target Congressional Black Caucus members, but also Black community leaders in general. And we had a letter that was circulating that was the Congressional Black Caucus's Health Brain Trust had a letter that was ultimately signed by 32 members of the CBC, which is a significant majority of them, asking the Biden administration to move forward quickly on the menthol rule and implement it. So again, this happened in July and it ran for 3 weeks. And we did also, in addition to just a general radio buy, we included advertising on some very popular Black radio programs. And then another interesting thing that we did that some people on the call might remember, because our partners were a big part of this in terms of their appearing on Roland Martin's show. So that was a great way to get to the audience that we really wanted to get to. So next slide, Mata. Sorry, I'm switching. Okay. So I will say we thought about showing the ad, but we can share the ad. So that you can listen to it yourself. We can share that with you all. But the bottom line is what we used in the radio ad was the statistic about 45,000 Black lives being lost every year. The whole stop big tobacco and calling out the industry was huge. And then we also focused in a couple of our radio ads on how tobacco advertising is directed clearly at the Black community and that there's more advertising in Black communities and that menthol cigarettes are cheaper in Black communities as well. And then we also had another ad that featured an ICU nurse that really hit at the health message, and she talked about how lung cancer rates are particularly high among Black Americans, making the connection, obviously, to smoking and menthol cigarettes in particular. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of where we are coming from our ads and what supported the messaging that we used in those ads. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Claudia to talk a little bit more about some other products.
Yeah, well, thank you, Amy, for all of that. I know, we have, several series of different ads that are, I know, created over time, but I do feel like, especially for someone working out in the field, particularly those menthol ads and the produce, really get people's attention. They're very clear around the statistic, kind of really calling out, did you know? And so, as I will just say, as everyone's sort of thinking about the materials that they'll create, just thinking through, even that, the color schemes, sticking to, the statistics and the messaging that really call and attention on these issues. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time real quick on this one, but I felt like I at the very least had to mention around the youth usage. So it's still a main messaging that works well across different demographics, public education, decision makers, different segments, different population groups. So as you're looking at developing your materials and all of that, I just, wanted to put at least the very least one slide. So, that those youth messages are integrated. It always, plays well. Again, general public and with decision makers, calling attention to youth usage rates that still continue to definitely be higher than traditional cigarette rates that still tend, especially with runny cigarettes, still tend to be used higher among other type of tobacco products. Next slide. So, we definitely wanted to mention on the slides here today, and I'll show a series of different main messaging, but, we have found in some instances, it does work well to mention the tobacco advertising, the amount of money that they're spending compared to what, states are able to, in terms of state agencies are able to commit and resources, and really talking about that discrepancy there. So again, another type of main messaging. It wasn't really talked about much in the focus groups and the polling that Amy mentioned, but it's still something that resonates well when you talk about sort of that long history of the tobacco industry targeting particular vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. So there's this great presentation. I see that a couple of my partner groups are on the call, so they're going to remember the name of the researcher off the top of their head faster than I can. If not, I'll try to do a quick research, but there's a great presentation that was given at this year's Menthol conference from a researcher. It was about an hour long presentation around that history of tobacco advertising, in particular different population groups. This is just a quick little sample, just showing that history, that advertisement, some that we typically use within our presentations. But still, I think it's still a very good message point that can be used. Maybe not so much around the general public, but among lawmakers, decision makers, understanding, as Amy sort of mentioned, like this just didn't happen by accident. There were steps that sort of led to the issue and the problem that we are dealing with today around tobacco usage. Next slide. I won't go through these statistics, but I did see in the chat that these slides are going to be shared. These are stats that most of us already have, either have access to or have them, but they still play very well. So continue to talking about, the percentage of population groups that are continuing to use these products. Definitely continue to still play well. Next slide. So again, just tying into not only the long history of the tobacco industry, targeting certain vulnerable populations, but even showcasing what they are doing today, particularly around point of sale marketing. So one of the tactics that can be used, that I've seen used effectively, is highlighting different advertisements that are happening in your community. So sort of customizing those, making them, very real, very, it's not, happening in the state next door, or the city next door. Like, this is happening in our community and it's happening today. So really talking about, the different tactics that the tobacco industry do to target, Black and brown communities, but not only talking about it, but image wise showing, what's happening, in our backyards, right? It's happening today, whether you're talking to a decision maker, a community leader, or just a community in general. Being able to really customize those is we have found that it's very effective. Next slide. So a couple of slides, I know, we just wanted to throw in really quick, just smoking rates among Latinos. So while we do talk and do focus a lot around, both the youth, right? Youth usage, Black usage, particularly around menthol cigarettes. We do have subgroups of Latino groups that are still using products at a very, very high level as well. So being able to call attention to that. So here are a couple of different slides that I know I go to that really trickle down to not only just Latinos in general as a general population, but looking at them as subpopulation based off of where those subgroups are. So you'll see here, Latinos that are US born versus Latinos who are coming from abroad, and where are they coming from abroad. So these are really good slides that are sort of my go-to slides. Next one. So we just wanted to talk about, and I'm going to throw this over to Amy as next, but we do want to talk about these opportunities to build awareness. So yes, it's important to talk about the statistics, talk about what's happening in your backyard and what's happening there. But there are things happening also, nationally. And so those are opportunities as well to build awareness. And so I'm really calling attention to the fact that it takes all levels of government to work together. So it's not just a federal issue. It's not just a state issue, or it's not just a local issue. It really needs to all come together comprehensively. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy next.
Thanks, Claudia. And we're sensitive to the fact that you all are really focused on community education and that thing, as opposed to necessarily direct advocacy. But as Claudia said, some of the things that are going on, advocacy and policy change wise, are useful in just educating the community in general about the scourge of menthol cigarettes and why we need to get rid of them. So next slide, Mata. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about something that I hope you all have heard about, which is FDA's proposed rule to eliminate all menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. We had some big news just this week that the proposed rules have moved to the final regulatory stage, which is going to the Office of Management and Budgets, Office of basically Regulatory Review, OIRA it's called. So we got the word that the rules are with them. So we are hopeful that these rules, which were initially proposed in the spring of 2022, will be finalized hopefully by the end of the year. And while, as Claudia said, this is not the be all end all, it is a very significant historic action where, the federal government and our current administration are saying that it is very important to get rid of menthol cigarettes to advance health equity because of all the things we've talked about, and save lives, especially in the Black community and some of the other communities that we mentioned, and that it will end the tobacco industry's predatory targeting of Black communities. The question is, when will this get implemented? So that's why the state and local actions that are happening all around the country are so critical. The policy actually has the potential to be the biggest thing that FDA has done to date, and the biggest thing our nation in general has done to help with youth initiation and this, like I said, this targeting. So you'll often hear in opposition to this rule that, oh, well, we need to study this more. We need to study the impact on the Black community and so forth. Well, there is overwhelming both scientific and real world experience to support that the fact that this will be enormously effective in the population groups that we just talked about. Next slide, Mata. And one of the things that I think is useful to mention in just doing community education, one, just acknowledging the fact that the FDA is taking steps to to address this and ultimately clear the market of menthol cigarettes as well as flavored cigars. It's also important to talk about the level of support for this, that this is not not something that most people oppose. As we heard in the message research, maybe not a lot of people are educated about what is different about menthol, but it is compelling for people when they learn that the federal government is taking this seriously and there is all this action and that many people support this. I mentioned the 32 CBC members that signed the letter that we talked about to the White House, encouraging them to move quickly. There was also a letter from many members of the Senate urging the same. So there is tremendous support in both houses of Congress. And then if you go to the next slide, Mata, we'll talk about, obviously, there is also support from many, many groups across the country. The sort of usual suspects, heart, lung cancer, AATCLC, CBHE, who I know our friends are on the call today about that. But then we also have most of the larger Black medical professional organizations, really all of them. The National Black Nurses Association, the National Medical Association, Black cardiologists, and then really key is the NAACP and a couple of other civil rights groups that have recently come on board who are supportive of this because they recognize everything we just talked about, that this is a huge problem causing enormous problems in the Black community, as well as addicting kids. So again, tons of support. And I think in doing community education, it's important to talk about that this is not some kind of bizarre concept. It's something that has tremendous support among policymakers, as well as the public in general, and communities that serve the Black community, and their sole focus is on improving life and health in the Black community, and they are supportive of this. So I think that's a very important point when you're just doing education, even if you're not trying to activate people on a particular policy. Okay, next slide, Mata. Again, I already mentioned this, but there was this letter that was circulated in August and was signed by 33 members of the 33 members. One was Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is not in the Black caucus, but at any rate, this showed a vast majority of CBC members supported this. And so one of the things that we did following this letter is we're poised to do thank you ads where we're actually naming the representative, naming, showing their picture, which we don't show that here, but we're doing a lot of things to show our gratitude to the elected officials who have been vocal champions for eliminating menthol cigarettes. So this is an example of a poster that we created that our organizers out in the field are having people sign, and then we're delivering them to the members of the Congress so that they yes, ASHTO is on both of those, right, Josh? That we are, we're doing a variety of things to underscore that support, that there's support back at home among the people that they serve. So just an idea there. And again, you'll see in the small print of this, the messaging is consistent with everything that Claudia and I just talked about. Next slide. Okay, this is going to be Claudia's turn where we talk a little bit more about how we're using this in the social media context. Claudia?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to show a few different resources that are available. You may or may not be using these already, but one of them, and I don't know, Mata, if you're able to click on, there is a hyperlink on the menthol social graphics, but so this just came live out from TFK. What is it, Amy? The last 24 hours, last 24, 48 hours. So this is on our website. So there are some images that you can either download and use and or mimic or take, take some of the verbiage and sort of recreate it in a way that's more that resonates more in your community that you're working in. But we definitely wanted to mention these new social graphics that are available. Like I said, just came live over the last 24 hours to talk specifically about menthol cigarettes. and the toll of tobacco. And Amy, I think there's going to be additional material that's going to be added to this as well. But for now, the social infographics are available now. Am I correct?
Right.
Yeah. So you're taking
That's
that.
right. And note that, our logo isn't on these. These are designed for everybody to share. And again, even if you're not involved directly in promoting the policy itself, we made these messages just educational about why it's important to eliminate menthol. Go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah. And Mata, we can go back to the slide. But I just kind of put some quick pictures here. So, all of you all are probably already using, from the tips, from the CDC tips campaign. So there's going to be a new series, a new round of those that will be coming out in 2023. And they will have, some focus around menthol use. So those are going to be excited. So it's not only creating things that are, for your community, but, also cross-sharing and knowing that there's these materials that already exist that you can incorporate in your communication strategy. I know our CBHE partners, I saw a couple of them on the call. So Kenny and Greg, I don't know if others have joined. I haven't checked the participant in there, but their website is a go-to for me all the time. So they have tons of information that's available that's specific to menthol messaging. And they update those, frequently as well. So if you haven't seen it in a while, you can always go to their resource page. And then of course, their No Menthol Sunday that comes up around the every year in May also gives that opportunity to be able to continue these messaging. Next slide, please. African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. So I know Amy's mentioned AATCLC. Again, they have information and resources that are available there as well. So different fact sheets. So if you're looking for what is the latest data, these are great resources that you can go to, be pulling that data from and creating your communication strategy, creating your media messaging. Truth Initiative is also another go-to that I know I personally go to all of these websites. So these are sort of my go-to, but it doesn't mean that it's all of them that exist. But Truth Initiative, I always have sort of that bright color creative ones as well. So they have some stuff that are specific on menthol messaging. And then the Public Health Law Center has some menthol resources as well. So there's not a lot imaging there or infographics that you can pull from. But if you're needing to pull materials for a specific meeting, maybe with some reporters and so forth, and you're trying to pull some of those material, I think all of these websites are good resources to go to. And like I said, this is not the end all, so I'm not leaving anyone purposely off, but I feel like these are sort of the frequent go-tos. I know when I'm trying to, go to and get quick information when it comes to menthol messaging. Next slide. So I just want to end with a couple of big key takeaways. So we can win a debate around menthol, though messages are received better by different demographic groups. So keep that in mind. So kids and teen focus may be effective overall, but a focus on Black Americans work better among Black voters. So sort of just being cognizant of your audience. Next slide. And again, these slides will be shared. So I wanted to put this on there in terms of the state and local team that exists for TFK. Actually, it may shift a little bit in the next couple or so months, but for now, this is the most recent and most active. So depending on your state, you may already be working with one of my counterparts of one of the other regional advocacy directors, but it has all our contact information there. So if you need to cross-share this, please feel free to do so. A lot of times I tell people I don't have all the answers, but we have a team, right? Many of us here on the call that we can go to if we don't have the answer. Last slide is just our contact information. And I don't know, Mata or Josh, if we have enough time for questions, but Amy and I are here to answer any questions you have today and or in the future. So thank you. Amy, do you want to say anything?
Just a general thing that I failed to talk about when I was presenting the focus group data. It was really surprising to me that several people said, in addition to, it was surprising that they understood about tobacco control policies that work, raising the tax, smoke-free policies. They were like, why are you talking about cigarettes, menthol or otherwise? People aren't smoking anymore. You need to be working on e-cigarettes. which was fascinating. So again, a lot of education needs to be done. So I applaud you guys for what you're doing, because, you know, it's very difficult to pass policies at any level if there isn't a demand for it. And once people are educated, there will be a demand. But the movement overall, other than a few people who are on this call that have been working for many decades on the menthol issue, I think it's fair to say the tobacco control movement as a whole has not focused enough on menthol cigarettes and why they're different and that kind of thing. So just adding that.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mata. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.